If you're joining, go ahead and put yourself on mute. Welcome, welcome. And I was just saying, we sometimes have a bit of music as people are settling in, but today I wanted to actually share a poem. Today I woke up and read my paper Washington Post, which I still receive, shows my age. And today in the Kids Post section, they have a feature that includes a bunch of awesome poems written by kids. And I was really, really struck by this one poem that was submitted by Emerson Miller Gabriel, who's 10 years old, from Washington. And I thought his poem was so beautiful and would help to center our work here today. His poem is called "The Season of Change." Seeds once dormant, now peeking up from the ashes. Trees start with seeds, rivers with raindrops, change with one voice, love created with a word. A song starts with a note. One sign, one voice, a march on Washington. May May be the sprouting of good. Have March be a march for our future. May spring bring the awakening. Let us be the seeds of song, the raindrops of change, the sprout that started a forest. Let it spread like a mighty wave. Love, peace, and justice. Let us be the seeds. Amazing. Amazing. I was just like so blown away and so moved, and in part so inspired because my 13-year-old son is learning about poetry right now. And I was trying to convince him and come up with ideas for how, why poetry could be impactful. And now I have this poem to show him today. I thought it was such a wonderful example of young people's voices and how they can inspire us. So let us be the seeds here today. Welcome to our first workshop in a series of capacity building workshops that are part of the Next Gen Public Media Initiative. Today's workshop is focused on models of youth-adult collaboration for public media. Though we know not everyone joining us here today is part of the public media community, and that is great. That's actually what we wanted to do. We wanted to widen the circle today, and we wanted to bring in some research from other fields, from the fields of youth development, psychology, looking at models of participatory research, et cetera. This is really about bringing the outside in and expanding our circle and our community today. Mommy. And I'll just remind everyone to put yourself on mute. We are recording right now the first 30 minutes. And we love all the musical contributions from each one of us. It's its own form of collaboration in our soundtrack. But I'll give you a quick overview here of what we'll be walking through today. All right, so welcome. That's where we are now. I'm going to give you a brief overview of a research brief that we published just yesterday. If you registered before yesterday, you would have received a copy of it in your email, but it's also available on our website now. And we are examining a variety of different models for youth-adult collaboration. Then we're going to hear from our wonderful guest speaker, Ben Kirshner, a distinguished scholar from the University of Colorado, speaking about some of the ways in which he has implemented this work, some case studies and other examples. Then we have a fantastic panel discussion with the founder of This Teenage Life podcast, Molly Josephs, and 3 of her youth crew members who are with us today. And so following that, we'll have a breakout activity where our youth delegates will be helping to report out from that activity. And then we'll have some time for sharing, synthesis, and a special closing activity. All right. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Next Gen Media Project, we are a research, development, and field building initiative to support the public media sector as it evolves to engage tween and teen audiences. So what do we mean by that? And what do we mean when we say it's important to engage tweens and teens? Well, the early stages of our project involved some foundational research where we interviewed 50 tweens and teens ages 10 to 17 across the country. We talked to them about their public media experiences or lack thereof. We talked about what was missing from their current media landscape. And we found that by and large, this is a missing middle audience for public media. Yet tweens and teens still very much need engaging and educational content, and especially as they are forming their identities, opinions, and sense of purpose during this critical period. What is our North Star in this project? Well, we draw inspiration from our namesake, Joan Gans Cooney, who founded Sesame Street in part with research. We want to really support a fundamental evolution, as she did, in how public media approaches teen and tween programming. So the work that she did for young children, we're hoping to do that same work with big kids. And importantly, we want to create the conditions for lifelong engagement with public media. So this research brief that I mentioned, it is really meant to be a jumping off point and something that all of you, we hope, can use for inspiration and some practical ideas. We link out to a variety of different pieces of research from academia, but also practical toolkits that have been generated from various organizations within and outside of the public media ecosystem. So the first section of the research brief really is talking about why it's important to collaborate with young people, all of the many benefits, and we ground this in recent research studies. So things like the fact that collaborating with youth helps us to respond to their stated desire to have more relatable content. We heard from youth that they want to see more representative content and that reflects their lived lives and concerns. It also creates a variety of developmental benefits, feelings of what have been termed societal influence in the research literature, and encouraging civic and political participation. Civical participation, that's maybe a new term. And of course, it is also about the potential to give youth power and voice in a world where they often have little. So what do we mean by youth-adult collaboration? Well, there are many different ways of framing it and lots of debate when you get into the academic literature. Generally, this term is roughly synonymous with also youth-adult partnership is another term you'll see a lot in the literature. And we feature a definition from researcher Shepard Zeldin, who talks about some of these core features. Multiple youth, multiple adults deliberating and acting together in a collective and democratic fashion over a sustained period of time through shared work, and generally doing work that's intended to promote social justice, strengthen an organization, and/or affirmatively address a community issue. Does every youth-adult collaboration or partnership have to do each of these things, or can it do each of these things? No, but these are aspirational goals. What kind of shared work is happening in these collaborations? Well, our featured scholar, Ben Kirshner, has developed this very powerful framework to think about the different kinds of work that we're doing together. And he talks about these three kinds: facilitation, apprenticeship, and joint work. So facilitation work is where we're guiding young people, but generally adults are neutral facilitators of a youth-led process. Apprenticeship is the kind of work where adults are actually providing active support throughout the collaboration through coaching and feedback. And so young people are carrying out that work with the guidance of adults. And joint work is the kind of work where youth and adults work alongside one another. The adult takes a role of senior colleague, much more of a peer relationship, and youth and adults are making decisions and implementing projects together. So what are the models and structures that we can be thinking about as we are developing grant applications, as we are thinking about ways to deepen and expand our work as it evolves over time? We talk in the brief about 5 buckets of different kinds of collaborations. It's important to note that sometimes projects can include multiple approaches, and sometimes they can evolve over time. An advisory group may eventually lead to developing a youth participatory research project. But here are some of the distinguishing features. Generally, youth advisory groups and leadership councils involve some kind of consultation for adult work, but young people are limited in their ability to govern or make decisions. It varies a bit when they get into leadership roles. In youth participatory research, these are inquiry-based projects that are designed with youth who are directly affected by the issue being studied. And generally, we're trying to engage in continuous and shared decision-making throughout the project. Youth co-design is distinguished by youth and adults working in that joint work process, developing a tangible resource that's beneficial to both groups. And youth media production and co-production, which our community knows a ton about. We have a ton of expertise. This is really like the OG form of youth adult collaboration, around since the earliest days of television, educational television projects. Wide range of scaffolding and resource supports across those projects. And then this bucket of learning studios and learning labs, studios, and youth-driven spaces is really distinguished by the physical space model, combining access to peers and resources and tools in a physical space where young people can gather together and work together. So that's just a quick overview, a brief of the brief. But I'm so excited to have Ben Kirshner here with us today to give us some examples of how this has come alive in his work, and in particular, how to build in this concept of reciprocity, where we build projects that are mutually beneficial for young people and adults. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Ben. Stop sharing.
Terrific.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Big fan of public media, and had the chance when I was a little younger in the 1990s and early 2000s to really be part of a kind of a emerging youth media landscape in the Bay Area. And so I'm just really happy to be with you all today. So I'm gonna, I have about 15 minutes prepared, and you'll hear some echoes of that really terrific framing. But also I'm going to try to share some examples and stories that kind of provide some texture. Feel free to pose comments or questions in the chat if I don't get to them while I'm talking. I think our goal is to leave a few minutes at the end for Q&A. So we'll try to make sure we address them. And so I'm actually going to open up my chat right now just to make sure I can kind of see it. And can y'all hear me okay? Great. Okay. I'm going to begin with a story then. It was, one sec. Just trying to get my slides to go. Maybe I need to get out of here. There we go. My slides are doing some weird things. Forgive me. Let me try starting that again. So I'm going to begin with the story. It was February 2006, and the Denver School Board had recently announced that it was going to shut down a proud and beloved community institution, Manual High School. Students organized walkouts and various kinds of protests, communicating that they were not down with the shutdown. After that, in other words, after 2006, school closures in communities of color across the United States became much more prevalent, as some of you may have seen in Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., just to name a few. But back then, it was novel. It was a kind of a novel and untested strategy to try to turn around a school that had been performing poorly on the state tests. And some argued contribute to a broader agenda of gentrification and displacement in cities. So the case got a lot of attention, including a feature article in the New Yorker, but it lacked student perspectives, particularly ones that paid attention to the kinds of contradictions they were navigating with confidence, courage, agency, and ingenuity. Contradiction, for example, being, yeah, there's some problems that are happening at my school, but I also love my school. I have teachers who love me. And why are you closing my school? This is where my uncle went. This is where my grandmother went, and things like that. So now I want to flash forward to the following October. So this walkout was in April, and then flash forward to the following October, and I, a white professor from CU Boulder, wanted to carry out a study with displaced manual students who are mostly African-American and Latino to understand their experience. And I wanted it to be a participatory project. That was a commitment of mine coming out of being a youth worker prior to going into academia. So I wanted to try to create a team where students from the school would study what had happened to themselves and their peers, look at it systematically, and take action based on what they learned. So how should I proceed? And I encourage you to kind of ask yourself, how should he proceed? Maybe you might say, you know what, don't even try, or here's what you might do. I could go hang around the neighborhood with flyers. I'd only recently moved to Colorado, like 2 years prior. At the time, you may recall MySpace. I could have tried to recruit on MySpace. That's supposed to get some laughs. I got a couple. And so I kind of faced that challenge. And then just as important, if I were to find myself in a room with a handful of students from Manual, how should I walk humbly into that room as an outsider to that community, while also lending guidance that I might have as an experienced researcher and someone experienced in kind of equity and social justice issues from the Bay Area. So the way I would pose that question is, how do you hold on to your expertise? And hold on might not be exactly the right verb, but how do you kind of bring your expertise while also letting go of power at the same time? I think that's like a fundamental dilemma, that when we as adults engage young people and we bring some kind of form of positional authority or power, and it's a delicate dance. And we made two smart decisions. And really, I attribute both of them to the graduate student I was working with named Kristen Posaboni. So first, we sought out a partnership with an existing group. It was the school's Youth Leadership Council, what they thought of as a sort of a student leadership or student government in exile, because their school had been closed. But they continued on to kind of support their school and kind of advocate for students from the school as they were distributed across 17 schools in the district. So I called, I was able to get the phone number of the person who was kind of coordinating that group, an adult, an African-American community member who was very connected to the school, worked for the district. I was able to find his email, a phone number, that kind of thing. It would have been, much more challenging to directly reach out to students. But I reached out to him, we had a phone call, and he was all in. He loved the idea of partnering with researchers and having part of the work of this YLC be to do participatory research to document their experiences and speak up about how it affected them. So I was really excited. We scheduled a time to meet. And then my grad student who I was working with, Kristen, observed, well, like, what about the young people? You're just assuming they're going to want to do this with us. And I was like, at first, maybe a little annoyed, but then I was like, oh my God, you're absolutely right. Yes. So we need to figure out a way to handle that and kind of think about that, engage them in that decision. And so she suggested we approach the first meeting with students like a combination job interview and pitch meeting. Like we would propose our idea, which was to work with them to document their perspectives and the experiences of their peers and leverage that for some kind of activism. And we would kind of ask them to interview us. So we went in to the first meeting, we kind of shared that idea and said, hey, would you like to take 5 or 10 minutes or more to come up with some questions? We'll leave the room, we'll come back in and you interview us, see if we're qualified to work with you. And they're like, all right. So we left the room, came back in. We were asked very compelling, challenging, provocative questions. I'm not going to list all of them, but I wrote them down because They really capture kind of what it takes to find out if someone's qualified. And one of them, they left me feeling vulnerable, a little exposed, a little humble, but also appreciative that they were engaging with this. And I remember one question that first a girl asked, which was, why are you doing this? And I remember saying something kind of lofty about the importance of student voice, and there wasn't enough kind of student narratives making their way into these stories, which was true, partly. But then a different student named Ricky said, yeah, but what are you going to get out of it? Like you. And I was like, oh, okay. I kind of tuned into his pitch and his tone. And I realized my first response had been inadequate. And I responded that, I had a job at the university. I was a tenure track professor. So I was getting paid to do this work. And in order to keep my job as a tenure track professor at the university, I needed to publish articles about what's going on in the education landscape. And so this was going to help me keep my job. I mean, I put it in like really blunt terms, which is another true answer to that question. And we left. We felt a little vulnerable. We weren't sure, much like one feels after a job interview. But a week later, we got an email saying, the students had discussed it and decided they did want to work with us. And so there's a couple lessons that I've learned, and I've even written about some of those lessons. But one I'll just say is to be transparent about interests and to think about interests in complex ways, meaning self-interest and also kind of ethical interests. And also the value of being authentic and being willing to be vulnerable in these kind of interactions. Kind of that was a big piece of the learning. But another one was, an ongoing effort to experiment with ways to try to play with roles and power and authority. And in this case, so that young people would be shaping and leading the direction of the project. It needed kind of ongoing interventions, is one way to say it, to try to figure out ways to kind of share power and decision-making for the conduct of the project. I'm just going to check our chat. I see some helpful comments in the chat, so thank you. Happy to speak more about that. And I'm now going to zoom out, and I really decided to really focus on that story. So I'll be quicker through some of the zooming out. And Mary, feel free to cut me off too. But I think I'll be on time, just because I think that'll be what will stick with y'all, and probably as public media people, you appreciate the power of a good example. But let me zoom out now and just share a few thoughts on how to approach this work, assuming that many of you, if not all of you, are going to be approaching it in different ways with young people. So the best name of this zooming out, this section, is called Ben's Litany of Mistakes, because I'm going to share a variety of mistakes that I observed in myself and in others. The first one, I don't think anyone here will necessarily do, but it does happen a lot, which is just to be hostile or defensive towards young people. To for example, the school principal who doesn't want to hear from students about how the school should be led if the students don't have a GPA above, say, B, for example, which I've seen. Okay, but we're not going to talk a lot about that. The next one, which I'm going to guess we all might be at risk of at different times, is, I'm getting this funny delay. Oh, yeah, there it is condescension or paternalism. And so this would be, for example, a school board listening to young people share their proposal that their school needed an actual physical gym because they were taking gym class in the school hallways, and responding to that by saying, and the students complete their pitch and then say, hey, do you have any questions for us? And instead of engaging with the substance of the proposal, the school board members say, how did you get so cool? And then they give them a round of applause and they leave the stage. So they're not engaging with the substance of what young people are saying, but just celebrating them for speaking up. That happens a lot. So you may move past that and you get really in the mix with students. Here's the next mistake. I've made a ton. You get so, what's the right word? You care so much about kind of the quality of the students' work and the message they're sending, and frankly, the substance of their work, that you kind of end up micromanaging. And that's something to watch out for. I think this is actually something that a lot of the students I work with are actually quite careful of. And if anything, they tend to make the next mistake, which is really to go too far in the opposite direction, which is to be really hands-off. And to just kind of frankly, one way to think of it would be to almost withhold one's experience or wisdom or expertise, and kind of be like, this is your project. And sometimes hands-off can be great. So I'm not saying it's always the wrong move. It's sometimes often the right move, but often it's dishonest to the premise of the work you're doing. And 9 times out of 10, particularly if it's a public media station initiating a project where they want to hear from young people, then like you have some skin in the game. And it's the same for me. I had skin in the game with this research project. So there's something, it ends up leading to all kinds of like twists and turns and pretzels if one's not kind of authentic about one's own stake and interest in a project. And so hands up doesn't really capture it. I do think the language of partnership is really the right aspiration, and we got a really lovely definition earlier. I think that's a great definition, by the way. And so I actually put it on my slide, not knowing, necessarily that Mary would share it again, but I'm going to go ahead and just share it again. I think it's a terrific definition as an aspiration. And I really want to underscore, if you're watching this and you're really like, hey, I want to do this. I've done a little bit of this. I want to know how to do it better. Like, it's not the best guide for action. I think it's a really good kind of anchor as something I want to aspire towards. Because it has like, different elements to it. One point I want to underscore about it that I like is that adults are in the picture in this framework. They're not trying to kind of hide or obscure their roles. Okay, so let's think about this as an aspiration. And now I am going to kind of break down with a little more detail, and maybe by accenting a couple different points, those three specific models that, oh no, I want to do something before I do that. I will break down 3 models, but I want to address this question of whether you should do it yourself, or whether you should work with an existing organization. I think that'd be like a really important decision that you'll be wanting to make. And so in the case that I described with the Tracing Transitions project, which was from Manual High School, we didn't want to do it ourselves. We really wanted to work with an existing organization. I have also done it myself though, and launched a project like where I'm directly facilitating interactions with young people as recently as last year through a project with the Wallace Foundation. So there's pros and cons to each. And just to flag a couple of them, pros for starting your own, you get to have that direct involvement with young people, and it's more likely that whatever is coming out of it is like really closely aligned with your priorities and visions. But what I would suggest you want to have is either know-how and talented staff within your organization, especially if you really understand the community of young people that you're working with. And I want to encourage you to think about having a sustainability strategy for that. With regard to partnering with an existing organization, the advantage is you're getting to leverage the expertise, insider knowledge, and relationships that others may hold who are in a context, particularly with young people, who may be growing up in different kind of circumstances than the staff in your organization. It also helps build capacity in the ecosystem. You're not competing for funding or competing for young people, but you're really kind of trying to lift up the whole ecosystem. There, it's still really important though to be involved and try to stay actively involved in co-design. And I've learned the lesson many times of like not outsourcing relationships, which is to say, don't assume if you have a relationship with the adult leader of that youth organization that just translates to the young people. But I really would encourage you to make an effort to get to know those young people, even if you're not facilitating it yourself. So those are a couple of things to think about on that front. Mary, I can actually kind of wrap up now. Should I go ahead and do that? Yeah. Okay, that's great. Because actually Mary already shared those 3 elements. So that's perfect timing. I'm going to just I want to go to my concluding slide though, which I will do, which is just to share a couple questions for you to think about. And I'm just having like this delay that's really annoying, but I'm going to be back. I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to share one last slide. Here we go, which is just some questions to ask yourselves as you embark on this work. So what are your aims for engaging youth? For how long and towards what ends? What kinds of youth work experience do you have on staff? Have you made your own self-interest transparent internally, like within your organization, to yourself and to others? And how might this work benefit youth participants and partner organizations? And will you be able to reflect and learn as you go? Because like you're always going to be making little errors. I mean, it's the best way I can put it. As you're learning how to dance with young people in this way, that's okay. But if you can reflect and learn, I think like you just get better, and the aims of the project will carry you forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was fantastic. Oh my goodness. So helpful to have your insights on this. And I want to be mindful that we said we were going to do Q&A, but I don't want to lose time with our panel discussion. And I think if it's okay with you, I'll invite people to put any questions they might have in the chat. And Ben can maybe respond via text or follow up later. Also, we have breakout discussions coming up. And so we look forward to talking about some of your questions and responding in our breakout conversations. But now I would like to, and thank you again, Ben, so much. I hope you can stick around. If you can't, that's okay too. Yeah. Now we're going to transition to hearing from some youth themselves. We have a wonderful panel of young people along with the